Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for a session where we're going to be looking at the A2P messaging in one specific market of North America, exploring some of the recent changes, some of the background, and looking to the future. My name is Simeon Coney, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for AdaptiveMobile. And today I'll be in conversation with Stefan Heller from the Campaign Registry. Stefan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Simeon. How are you?
Very good, thanks. So, Steph, it'd be great if you could give us some of your background to your role at the Campaign Registry and also some of your experience in the A2P market.
Sure, definitely. My background, so here actually at the Campaign Registry, I am the Vice President of Business Development and Strategic Partnerships. And really what that means is that we're working with all of our partners and all of our customers, and that follows through from the aggregators on the one side, or the campaign service providers that we would call them, and the brands, all the way through the MNOs, the carriers networks, and everything in between that, which I know we're going to go through later. So really in the background of this is that I have probably about 15 to 18 years background in telco, working at several different VAS organizations. Before working at the Campaign Registry, I worked for over 8.5 years at Open Market, one of the leading shortcode aggregators in the US and North America, in fact. So prior to that, I did have quite a large stint in the record industry in Europe. So I was working, signing bands and releasing music. So I've been involved in content and content creation for a while, and now I'm here heavily involved in telco and working with compliance and regulations in the 10DLC space for the Campaign Registry.
Fantastic. A very broad and rich experience there.
Yeah.
So today, what we're going to be looking to do is cover for a range of topics. Firstly, for some of you who may not be familiar with the term, we're going to explore what is 10DLC, 10-digit long code, and what it means from A to P perspective. Looking at really how this is enabling good behavior and also helping address some of the poor sending practices. And in fact, in that, we'll explore some of the sending behaviors and practices that we're actually seeing active in the network. And then more importantly, for the majority of people who are engaged in very good practices, great conversations with their end customers, what we'll be looking at is the advantages and the benefits and also some of the future capabilities that the 10-digit long code environment and ecosystem will bring us. So to start with, Steph, maybe if you can give us an introduction on really the range of options that are available to brands, to enterprises, to businesses looking to communicate with their customers over mobile messaging. Steph, so I think your microphone is muted there.
I beg your pardon. So yes, the shortcode originators that we have in the US were originated by the carriers and are a fully sanctioned product that you can use to send A2P messaging. Long codes the long code product was set up originally, it was people's personal phone numbers. So long codes were not meant to be used for A2P messaging. And so really content or business content going over A2P messaging going over long codes is deemed unsanctioned content by the US carriers. Text-enabled toll-free is another product that goes through the carriers' networks that they've obviously support, but that's really managed by some third-party organizations and not directly by the US carriers. They support it, but and sanction it, but it's managed by third parties. So 10DLC is another fully supported and sanctioned content originator to carry A2P content, and 10DLC kind of does what it says on the tin. It's a 10-digit long code. That's what 10DLC stands for. So it's a long code, but it's sanctioned, hence the differentiator.
I see. So from a user's perspective, it looks like a normal telephone number, perhaps is already in their address book from the business they've been engaged with.
Right.
Got yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, you can take basically an existing long code that you're using today, and you can turn it into a 10 DLC just by simply registering it in the routing mechanisms that are available here in the US.
So that sounds like a huge bonus and benefit to all of those businesses who have an existing voice identity today. They got a telephone number, and now it enables them to interact and engage with their customers. Is that correct?
Correct, and it's not only voice, it's regionality. So if you need to identify to your end users from a regional perspective, a short code is, you know, a 4, 5, 6-digit number, so it doesn't locate the business. It doesn't give a more regional flavor to how you want your business or your brand to come across. So when you're communicating from Ford of Virginia, then you can have a Virginia-based number so that people know that they recognize the area code as that's who they're speaking to. And although people move around the country a lot, and so maybe area codes and that specific adoption of an area code specific to a brand may be less important, it can also be incredibly important, because when someone says, I am your insurance company based in Virginia or in Iowa, then you want to be able to show in some cases that, yes, we have a number that is associated with that city or that state.
I see. And I guess given sort of the larger pool of numbers available, it creates an opportunity for so many more innovative services that perhaps wouldn't exist under the sort of the more constrained pool of, say, short codes or toll-free numbers.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay, interesting. I mean, certainly from a security perspective, I mean, some of the challenges we found up to now without sort of the formalization of 10-digit long code is a number is a number. You know, it's really hard to tell what is a consumer, an individual, a person generating a message versus an application or a business. So, you know, one of the huge advantages we see is this formalization of a business 10DLC market finally gives a structure to that whole ecosystem to give a separation of identity.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think being able to really know who and what is going to be happening on a particular originator is really important to the carriers, because they need to know who is accessing their network to reach their end users, which may well be customers of the brand, but they're also end users of that mobile network. And it's very important for the mobile network to know that their end users are being looked after, that they're not getting messages that is unwarranted.
Great. I mean, certainly one myth I want to bust right now is that there sometimes is a perception that paid channels become cleaner, as in the process of paying to deliver messages, such as exists within short code and toll free, means that the channel is clean. I mean, certainly in our experience, we absolutely know that not to be true. All it does is tend to segment to be, frankly, more profitable spam running over those particular bearers.
Yeah, I think that there's always the person that's on, you know, the person that's looking to defraud intentionally can operate on either very, very slim margins, or find that even if the costs go up, that they still can have a profitable business. They just may have to send a hell of a lot more content to be able to make their way through the filtering and monitoring and affect a certain percentage of the population with their fraudulent message, whether it's smishing or phishing, or whether it's some other kind of defrauding.
Yeah, it becomes a numbers game, a business case of what generates the greatest value. So, I mean, we've been talking about brands and enterprises, and we've been talking about carriers. I mean, it's actually quite a complex ecosystem, isn't it, of players? I mean, can you talk us through some of the major players in this ecosystem?
Sure. No, so what we've done at the Campaign Registry is we've tried to come up with terminologies that kind of does what it says on the tin, so that there is very clear identifiers. So when we look at this slide that you just put up here, where you look at from left to right, the brand is the company that the end user, the consumer, believes that it's sending them the message. In reality, it's normally there is a CSP in front So that campaign service provider has a messaging platform that enables that brand, and they work with that brand to help them send their messages. And that CSP could connect to another CSP, could connect to another CSP, but eventually they all end up at a DCA, which is a direct connect aggregator, which is, it's kind of, if you imagine that there's a world of CSPs, all CSPs are there, all CSPs are equal, they all do a similar function. But there are some CSPs that are more equal than others, and these are the DCAs. These are the ones that have the direct connection to the mobile networks and really are the one step before it terminates into either a gateway or directly into the MNO's SMS systems. So then after that you have a gateway, which is sometimes an MNO controlled gateway. Sometimes it could be a third party that is used by the MNO to control their gateway, the gateway access. Then you have the mobile network operator, and then you have the end user. And very often there's, as you can see underneath, what we try to put is that in the green boxes is different names, or sometimes the same names that people call themselves, or different people in the ecosystem call all the various people that are there. I mean, you can see things like aggregator shows up a number of times. It shows up as a CSP and a DCA, which is true because a CSP can be a DCA. So yes, an aggregator is a CSP, an aggregator is a DCA. A DCA can hold both roles. In some cases, there are DCAs that can also be a gateway. They may have contractual, they put in place contractual arrangements with an MNO to actually be a gateway access point into that MNO's systems. So you can have some CSPs that are DCAs that are gateways. So you can see that it can get complex. So we've tried to make sure that when people are saying, well, who's the sender? Well, that's the CSP. Who's the aggregator? It's the CSP. And you're looking the same thing for MNOs. MNOs can be carriers, they can be operators. People have different names, which basically hopefully will distill down into these main terms that we put in there in the main boxes.
Okay, and I guess certainly in terms of, let's say, North America, which is somewhat geographically constrained. I mean, you said it's a complex environment, but when we start to expand this out from a global perspective, there's an even greater number of relationships, potentially even between the CSPs and DCAs, where people are handing off traffic in order to get terminating networks at the best trade-off of, I guess, deliverability, time, and price.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, Simeon, here in the US specifically, there isn't that interconnection between the carriers. So, there is for in terms of A2P traffic. If you want to terminate A2P traffic to every single network, you either go through a DCA, a direct connect aggregator that does have all of those individualized connections into those various carriers, or as a DCA, you've gone and you've set up unique individual connections to every single carrier in the US market to be able to terminate into those markets. Otherwise, you have to go through somebody who has. So having those direct connections is incredibly valuable. And it also means that those aggregators or those CSPs that are DCAs are in a position of strength, really, because they have to not only they're not only managing huge volumes of traffic to multiple MNOs, but what they're also doing is they have to ensure that they're managing their networks 100% in compliance, because the carriers, the MNOs, will look at the DCAs and go, why are you sending me bad traffic? Why are you sending me spam traffic? Why is this traffic bad from you? Now, it could be as the DCA, it's a CSP down the chain, or a CSP for that CSP, or the CSP is, the hops below. So that's why sometimes the DCAs who operate as a gateway as well are sometimes called a zero hop, because they're right there in front of the carrier, and they're the one that the carrier has the contract with, and the carrier will be, the MNO carrier will be looking at and saying, clean up your act, do this better, why are we getting this spam? And that's why everyone in the chain has to start being responsible for better messaging. And I think that's where both, Adaptive and the campaign registry have a very important role to play, and are playing right now, to make sure that compliant messaging and good messaging is coming from the very inception, from the brand all the way through the chain, through to the MNO.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from Adaptive's perspective, I mean, what we're finding is this is really helping everyone understand the chain and understand, who really has the ability and the responsibility to be involved, to take some ownership for where they are, to improve the quality on that. I mean, we talking here about the roles. I mean, certainly in terms of some of the challenges that we've faced in the market for a long while now, without this sort of formalization of campaign registration, publishing, and compliancy auditing, is, I mean, first off, there is been no easy way of identifying what is A2P versus P2P. When everything turns up on the same pipe with a very similar looking identity, it was really hard to say, well, what controls should we apply to what source? So, I mean, certainly we know that in much of the infrastructure, whether it was some of the interaggregation solutions or at the termination points, that controls were often applied to both origins of traffic, to A2P and P2P, because there wasn't the separation. But also we saw that the consequences of that had quite an impact to the way that the brands were communicating with their customers, because there was no concept of rate management. The rate controls were deemed as if everyone was an end user rather than a business. And of course, 9 a.m. businesses need to talk to their customers, unlike consumers.
Right.
Exactly. Inconsistencies on reputation and risk management. At what point might you want to consider a user doing something bad, maybe 10, 15, 20 things a day, compared to a brand if they're doing 1 million messages a day? Got to consider that in context. So I think certainly what you're saying, Steph, is so much of this, it's about identity. It's about understanding the chain and giving that visibility to every player in the chain of the appropriate transactions, so they can then play their part and apply the appropriate controls at that point. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I would. And I think that part of what I see as Adaptive's massive contribution to this area is their ability to work with companies such as the Campaign Registry to understand what somebody states they're going to be doing, and then be able to say, and yes, you are doing that. And it's that rewarding of good behavior. And it sounds awful to almost have a Pavlovian response, right, to good behavior. It's like patting on the head and go, yes, and you get a prize of not being shut down. But I don't think people really realize the extent of spam and how invasive and pervasive spam can be, and how much it affects the end user in terms of their support of a brand, whether that brand is the MNO, as in, oh my God, I get so much spam from my carrier, carrier X, MNO X. I'm going to change. And that's a massive ARPU lost from the MNO's perspective. To, somebody pretending to be Subway and sending out spoof messages on behalf of Subway, on behalf of your bank. I mean, that's a very big, subject as well, financial fraud. And the loss of identity. When you've had that, your trust of that brand goes plummeting down. So by being able to protect the brand, being able to help protect their messaging by giving that transparency and that not understanding of who is it sending it, what are you saying you're going to do, and then ultimately ending up with adaptive systems looking at it and going, yes, you're doing that. Thank you very much. You can go through this gate. You're absolutely, please pass through with all speed. That you can, check, off you go. And I think it's, I think that there are huge challenges in that. I think what you were saying earlier, Simeon, is you make it sound really simple, but it's not. That's the thing, is that none of that is simple, because no matter how much you're trying to stop somebody, go, okay, we have stopped that behavior. Fantastic. Somebody looks for some other way to get around it, because the potential value of getting bad messaging that is going to steal identity, or that's going to have somebody go to a site to plug some information in to get sold something that maybe they don't even want or doesn't really exist, is valuable. And so, yeah, there are companies out there that will pay a lot of money to get their messaging through, and it's bad messaging.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think it's fair to say, I mean, it's understandable why people perceive today predominantly all the controls have been all stick, no carrot. You know, it's been around the focus of trying to manage the bad message. And I really think this is what 10DLC brings, is it starts to bring the identity to be able to reward good behavior. You know, how do you reward someone if you can't tell who they are, if there isn't that persistency? So I think, you know, on that topic, we've been talking about campaigns. I mean, can you give me your definition? What does the campaign registry consider to be an A2P campaign?
Yeah, so an A2P campaign really, from the registry perspective, consists of a brand and a use case. That's delivered by a CSP, because the campaign registry is built for campaign service providers who represent their brands to put the information in and put transparent information. In other words, this is brand X. We validate and verify as the registry that is brand X. And then what is brand X going to do? They're going to do this use case in this industry vertical. So given that use case, and given the profile of the brand, then there is a response from the M&Os of, okay, that sounds great. So they should go here in our throughput chart or here in our throughput chart. So it kind of depends on kind of the response mechanism to how that brand has been validated. If there's a lot of history, if it's a large organization, it would get one response. If it's an organization been going 1 month with 2 people working in their garage, it's a little bit of a different response. So it's all about accessibility. You know, do you trust somebody that's been going for 1 month, 2 people that have a great idea but have no history of actually been working in the messaging ecosystem at all? How do you give them the opportunity to send their messaging, but also with the growth opportunity as they grow to then scale up and to get more accessibility? So that said, the brand and the use case will deliver the who and the what of the messaging program. And then basically that registration gives a transparency to the M&Os to therefore give back to the brands and the CSPs that improved quality and predictability. And predictability is really because in long code space, where you're running unsanctioned traffic, you're kind of playing Russian roulette. And what you do is you're playing Russian roulette with companies such as Adaptive, because you will look at that, as you say, you don't know where the traffic's coming from. You're just looking at the message and the impact from people, and going, well, everybody's saying this is horrible messaging, or there's lots of stops being going out, or 7726 reports and people going, I hate the message. And the immediate response from a company such as Adaptive is, well, suspend it. Our recommendation is to suspend and review. Let's and then somebody in the M&Os will review the message and go, it is or it isn't allowed to go forwards. But that interrupts the messaging flow. So I think with that transparency of, I'm this brand, I'm doing this campaign, and it's clear, everybody's aware of what they have to do to get that information into the registry, and therefore what the results are for putting that information in. It means that information also working hand in glove with people like Adaptive. The registry then provides, the registry with Adaptive provides this 360-degree view of the message to the M&O. And more importantly, what it means is that you would potentially see a reduction in the instances of, I would hope, false positives. I don't know if that's what you feel as well, Simeon, in that.
Oh, most definitely it is. I mean, so in fact, actually, I mean, one of the questions we've got in first off is, how do we separate traffic? So we've been, from A2P versus P2P, and really what we're talking about here with registration is the creation of this shared database intelligence that enables, as you say, Steph, every party involved in that chain to get an understanding of, from the sending identity, here's the use case, here's the brand, here's the what, here's the what we're expecting to see. So, whether that's delivered via a database dip or rich metadata associated with the message. We're seeing a range of different mechanisms actually doing that separation. Some people are separating it on different connections, on different binds, on different identities. Some people are providing that enrichment as the message is being passed in the header. And other people are saying, hey, here's the database, you can gain access. The key thing is the information is available now.
Right, and the other thing that we do as well is that we have a series of portals, both UI and API driven, which are available to both the CSPs and DCAs, and also available to the MNOs. So the MNOs, when they see a campaign and with a brand being registered, they not only see, oh, it's come through this DCA. This is the DCA we know and we trust and we love and we have a long relationship with, and that's from DCA. And they go, okay, and this is the campaign. And they say, oh, well, wait a minute, it's come from this CSP. That CSP is using ever so friendly DCA to terminate the message into our network. Oh, okay, that's great. So in fact, that brand belongs to that CSP. Oh, well, no, it doesn't. In the registry, we can see that actually that CSP is the interim CSP to another CSP who actually has the relationship with the brand. So now with that map, you can start to clearly identify where something goes wrong, but also where something goes right. So the CSPs that are doing a great job, that they're really working hard to make sure that they're sending compliant messaging and that they're really educating and informing their customers, their brands. And it also, that map from Adaptive's perspective also becomes incredibly important when there's that, how does one reward behavior, and who in the chain is responsible ultimately for ensuring that good behavior, who is actually working closely and making sure that they're checking things as it goes through and as it comes up into finally ending up in the end user's hands.
I see. So really a question come from the audience, Steph, but certainly at the forefront is this live? Is this just a great idea, or is this something that people are signed up to?
And that's a really good question. I mean, a lot of people, anyone who's been following 10DLC in the US knows that it's been talked about for years. And it definitely, like most things with something large and complex, because each carrier has their own codes of conduct that are unique, that are unique to their own particular network. And each network has certain limitations and can do things a certain way and other things another way. So it's not all the same. So there are complexities in actually technically having this launched and up and running. Companies like Verizon and US Cellular were very early adopters to pushing 10DLC into the marketplace and implemented a very good system to just make sure that they were able to check and quantify things very early on. As things developed with the registry, the MNOs all started to look at the information the registry was giving and decided that they would also like to use this to help their network controls and network management. So they really understood what was going across the network. So with the registry now, it is live, it is in the marketplace. We have all of the carriers live in some way, shape or form. I would say in the next month or so, there will be full cross-carrier coverage. And there are some unique edge cases in terms of the types of use cases that are still being ironed out, mainly because there are real complexities around some of those use cases. But the fact of the matter is that they are being worked out and these use cases can be brought together. So with the registry, you can register a campaign in minutes. The information when you register it from the brand is authenticated and verified, and which means that the MNOs look at that verified information and know it's been verified by a third party. That exchange of transparency, giving you that improved service quality, and then of course facilitating the complete delivery chain management. So when you're looking at from the inception of the message all the way through to the receiving, the registry is not in the routing of the message. We are there as a register to provide information about what someone has stated they are going to do from a brand perspective with a use case attached to that brand.
I see. Okay. So I think in context then, we've got really a clear path for the good, legitimate messaging and a way of being able to really understand who is doing what. I mean, I think it's probably worth spending just a little bit of time looking at the context of this separation of, where has this traffic been existing in amongst? What's the bad traffic we talk about? And when we look at some of the common abuses that are active in networks now, this spans such a broad range of definitions. I mean, in the first instance, there's bulk sending without consent of the end user. Just because something looks commercial, have they actually got permission by the recipient to send them that message, to make that contact? That can sometimes be very well intentioned communication, or in fact, in some instances, we've seen quite a severe degree of harassment. There are some very aggressive businesses out there who operate on the periphery potentially of legitimacy, often in the same industry as some who are delivering a very valid service, but they're taking the opportunity that end users are finding it really hard to distinguish what is good versus what is bad when they get that little ting of a message arrival and they're looking at the message in their phone. So this is where we start to see sort of harassment and social engineering play. It could be threatening behavior from loan reclamation companies when there is no loan. It could be social engineering, trying to emulate or impersonate particular organizations. We actually also see sending practices like unauthorized transfer of consent, gaining consent for sending one thing, but then using that as an approval to send a whole range of completely unrelated campaigns. So what we have here now with this registry is the ability of seeing what actually was approved at sign up and what is now being sent, and how do those two things reconcile?
Right.
We also see quite often attackers who are impersonating and leveraging very well recognized brands. And again, when everything is a 10-digit long code, it is a number. There's no real concept of the identity. So anyone is free to put any of the major brands in there and have people try and perceive that that is whom is sending this message. So I think particularly in context of 10DLC, cleaning up this ecosystem becomes increasingly more important and separating these out. Some of the other behaviors that we're seeing, and in fact, already with the introduction of 10-digit long code and the codes of consent, is we're already seeing an improved sending practice. So things like snowshoeing and identity sharing is essentially the opposite ends of the concept of identity. Snowshoeing being one person spreading the load using multiple different 10-digit long codes to send the same campaign, and identity sharing being using one connection, whether it be a short code or a single number, to host a variety of businesses behind there. This type of system, Steph, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's going to start giving us a better association from identity to company.
Yeah, I think the snowshoeing was definitely a thing that was happening within long codes quite a bit. To be able to get throughput as well, people would fire up thousands of numbers so that they could increase their TPS. Because if one number equaled 1 TPS, then 10 numbers equals 10 TPS. And so you can start to rotate numbers and do all the kinds of things that the MNOs really dislike. So part of making the 10DLC channel an active, fully sanctioned and supported channel was to take away that whole concept of numbers means throughput. And so it's all based on campaigns now. So you do the campaign that is right for your business with the number of TNs, the number of numbers that you actually physically need to run that. So if you need 50 numbers to run the campaign, then great, go get 50 numbers. But you don't have to get 50 numbers just to get the throughput. The throughput at the campaign level should be enough to ensure that you can run your campaign successfully on a single number. If you've got an agency and you've got 5,000 agents and they're all insurance agents and they're all regional and local, or you want to be able to, as a business, track what each of your agents does, and so you have an individual number for that agent, then yes, you can have 5,000 numbers attached to a campaign. There is nothing to stop that. I mean, it's all about understanding that throughput now on 10 DLC is at the campaign level. So there's a cost saving to the businesses here. And also it means that when you look at abuse, if you're not having hundreds of thousands of numbers associated with a campaign, which from Adaptive's perspective, you just see hundreds of thousands of numbers. You don't know if they're all the same campaign, different campaigns. Now what we're looking at is that in the registry, we can tell you there are these 4,762 numbers associated with this campaign, and you'll be able to therefore know that those 4,762 numbers should be doing this type of business, should have, and there's sample messages that we capture. So again, Adaptive is able to look at that and using a whole bunch of AI, because I don't expect a bunch of people sitting there doing this, but using AI, being able to very quickly identify and flag things that are not following a correct path. And I think that's one of the key things, that and tell me if I'm wrong here, Simeon, but I've always found that when companies such as Adaptive, especially, when you find abuse, it's not like Adaptive saying, no, stop it, and like a gate comes down straight away. It depends on the MNO that you're working with, or the aggregator or CSP you're working with, because I know you work with both. But the controls are normally send a flag, investigate the flag, and then take an action. But there are some instances where this is known spam and thou shalt not pass. Is that correct? Is that how it would tend to work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and again, I think that's one of the major benefits to what we see with 10-digit long code, which is, there are some people out there who are out to deliberately defraud, harass, and to cause the greatest possible impact to the end user. But for the vast majority of other things that exist sort of in this middle gray area, it's perhaps the sending practices are not as good as they should be. I mean, after all, their business is being a doctor's, a dentist, a gym, hairdressers, whatever. They're not experts in knowing what is effective and approved ways of contacting their customers. And with this concept of identity, we can finally have this feedback loop to say, hey, we now can reach the people responsible for onboarding that account, and we can offer them guidance and advice on how to improve their sending behavior to get their traffic through. Because at the end of the day, we want brands to talk to their customers. It's not about stopping blocking. Yes, we want to stop the bad stuff, but we want to facilitate and enable. And I think what we see with this registration is it gives that ownership, it gives us the identity, the association to be able to give that information back to the source to improve this.
And also this, really, anyone, again, that's been messaging or is planning to message in the US marketplace, there's already a set of guidelines and best practices available to people to review. I mean, the CTIA's best practices and guidelines for messaging definitely apply to 10DLC. They also apply to text-enabled toll-free. They apply to shortcode. So these guidelines and best practices are very clear and a very good starting point for anybody looking at how can I be more compliant? How can I ensure my messaging is not misleading or deceptive in some way? Even though somebody could be sending a totally genuine message on behalf of their gym, it could be caught in a filter that Adaptive has created because there is a known method of misleading people or trapping information a certain way, and somebody who maybe doesn't understand some of those guidelines and best practices. I see that one of the points that you have there is URLs and URL call to actions. Some of those things that we're looking at when we're talking about URL shorteners as well. URL shorteners are not allowed on certain carriers here in the US because you don't know where they're going. The end user looks at a URL shortener and doesn't know for certain that they are going to that brand's page. They don't know they are going to the sign up page or the coupon page or the promo page or the whatever page it should be going to, which is why you can put in a URL in the message, but you have to spell it out. You have to show the chain, the full chain. There's no shortening really. So I think there's a lot of best practices that people messaging sometimes forget, don't realize, haven't read the guidelines correctly, or sometimes because they maybe don't do frequent messaging. It's like a muscle, right? If you don't flex it enough times, then it goes a little flabby, and so you forget certain things. And so the key things are to read those guidelines and read those best practices over and over and over again. And if you don't know, you reach out to people like Adaptive, you reach out to people like the Campaign Registry, you reach out to who you should be working with, which is your CSP. Your primary CSP should be giving you all the information, because they're handling messaging day in, day out, and they should be able to fully inform you what you should be doing.
Exactly, because frankly, those guidelines are there for a reason. I mean, it's like every point on a checklist has been earned by pain. Same reason with the guidelines. Every single point on there is because somebody has suffered somewhere. And when we look at it from an end user's perspective, I mean, yeah, you talk about URLs. I mean, what we have on the screen here is just an example of some of the broad, confusing attacks that are hitting users. We're seeing things like in the bottom left here, the fact that so many handsets auto-render the first URL that's in the link. People are putting legitimate URLs at the start and the bad one after. We're seeing malware using automated URLs to self-replicate and actually to initiate vicious attacks. We're seeing some really clever techniques where people are doing dynamic page creation, dynamic redirection at the point of page requests. So, simple scripts that will just follow and look at sites is not enough to be able to infer what's really going on, as well as very sophisticated phishing and takeover. So yeah, when we look at best practices, there is a reason for every single point on there.
Yeah.
I think certainly in our perspective as well, I mean, in North America, it's brilliant that we're now seeing this formalization of code of conduct. We're actually seeing, again, a wave of formalization of best practices spread right across the globe. I mean, just even as we've covered, definition of campaigns and requirements, talking about appropriate and unapproved. I mean, Steph, I'll certainly ask your view on that. But yeah, just even the capture and the definition of fraud and scam and deceptive practices. I mean, for so long, that didn't really exist in many agreements or in many regulation there. So we're now starting to see an appropriate infrastructure, as well as the concepts of consent and choice. These were almost foreign terms, unused terms when people were talking about messaging.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, when you one of the things I see you put up there is the illegal and illicit content, and there are a huge number of guidelines. And what people don't realize, a very simple thing, they'll look at the US and Canada and they go, oh look, marijuana is legal in so many different states in the US, and so we as a cannabis dispensary want to just tell our customers that their order is in, or what would they like, or a confirmation of an order, a receipt of it, or a tracking number to be able to tell people if there's a delivery that's being done. And what people forget is that in the US specifically, cannabis is and marijuana is a state-approved product. So in other states, it's not approved, and it's not that the carriers don't want to handle the messaging. They can't. They are federally licensed, and as it's not federally approved, as a federally licensed organization, as an MNO would be, they can't carry this traffic. It would be contravening their licenses. So it's nothing against the product. It is literally just from a legal perspective, they cannot do it. So, it's like, get it federally approved and then maybe we can. But then you look at, say, in Canada, it is federally approved in Canada, yet certain carriers do not want to carry the content, as the carriers are not government controlled, government owned. They are private concerns, they're private networks. They have their own rules and regulations, and they can decide what traffic they do or they don't want to carry. Now, I think in the US it is very much more, as long as you meet the requirements. If you've got age-gated content, age-gated. If you don't age-gate it, yes, someone's going to get annoyed and shut your messaging thing down. So age-gate the content, understand the compliance regulations, understand the requirements, understand the individual carriers' codes of conduct, then if you cover all those things off, any carrier, any MNO is going to turn around and going to go, thank you for meeting all of our requirements. Thank you for meeting our code of conduct. Go forth and message with our blessing.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so,
exactly.
it's, and that information, that transparent information then goes to people like Adaptive, and you can say, okay, should we be on guard about this? No, it is exactly as stated. It's on numbers that have been registered. It's on a campaign identifier that we can see. So this whole chain now becomes clean, which means that Adaptive can focus on the unsanctioned. So that if the sanctioned is, you have much lighter checks on the sanctioned traffic. You still have to have checks because you never know, right? You never know what may or may not happen with any traffic. Something could be hijacked. You just don't know. But it means that the focus then veers to the remaining traffic that isn't registered. What are they doing?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think, as you say, there's so many complex rules. What we're finding is people are adopting our content control platform in order to automate and control the management of that. When it is rules based on a specific terminating network, it requires some level of automated intelligence to deliver that. But the other byproduct of all of this is we're starting to profile who is doing good behavior. What are the rewards? So, right now, I think really the focus is on building the adoption of this. But certainly what we see is there's this opportunity for a virtuous feedback. People are earning a good, clean reputation. So with that, first off, I think probably one of the common requirements is improving sending rate, enable people to send more if they've had good behavior, reduction on removal of possible restrictions. You mentioned URL shorteners. The thing is, when you've got 160 characters, it's a great way of actually being able to give yourself more content for your words rather than URL links. Right. So again, good behavior may start to improve that capability. And in fact, there's some really exciting, interesting services when we look at some of the other enhancements that can come from this. Particularly when we look to the future. I think it's also really worth noting that whilst this 10-digit long code registration is starting in North America, globally, we see so many of the major traffic senders are headquartered in North America. So many of the major sending organizations, the CPAS, etc., are headquartered there. That global adoption will start to roll out, and we will start to see some of these concepts and benefits actually emerge into other markets, as well as onto other traffic bearers, as well as generating new services.
Yeah, I think we're already seeing from the campaign registry's perspective, we are already working with multiple global telcos, MNOs, that are looking at ways to, a lot of them are already monetizing the traffic coming into their networks. But again, it's the same thing. It's like, how do I still control it? How do I control what is coming in? It's one thing to charge for it, but as you said very early on, just charging doesn't stop bad behavior. That's not. It stops a small percentage. There's the casual who would probably stop doing it because maybe it becomes too expensive. But the determined, it doesn't stop that. And that's always going to be a problem. People want to be able to get that message through, however bad it is. Their intent is to try and get it through to as many people as possible. So they're looking at every opportunity to move it through. So how do you stop it? It is by having the people who want to send good messaging tell you they're sending good messaging, having it identified from a third-party perspective that it is unique, it is good, and working hand in glove with your spam monitoring provider and your traffic monitoring provider to ensure that it's followed through. What they say they're going to do, they do. And so the combination with Adaptive and with the campaign registry gives that 360-degree view and starts to actually mean that you can, from an MNO's perspective, you can reward even certain types of use cases. You could say, you're doing 2FA, we love 2FA. 2FA is fantastic. Number one, Adaptive and TCR can check it is actually doing that. And then when you know it's doing that, you can say, well, you know what, because you're sending so much 2FA, we're going to give you a 5% discount on your traditional MNO fees because we want you to do more. We trust you, we've shown that you're doing good behavior, we can reward it monetarily, or we could reward it with more throughput, or we could reward it with a faster onboarding process. There's so many different things that can be done here to enhance anybody's systems when they're talking to people that have stated what they're going to do.
Exactly that. And I think, to summarize, that's really the huge benefit of this. We can identify and associate that good behavior with an identity, and we know who to reward. Frankly, I think it is a really exciting future. So, Steph, I would like to thank you. And from that, wish you a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.